Senate Judiciary Committee is called to order. Our first order of business is request for bill introductions. Do I have any bill introductions? Seeing one, would you like to approach the podium? Welcome to committee. Please state your name and who you're with.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Sean Miller. I'm here representing the Kansas Land Title Association today. I'd like to introduce 21 RS 0089. That is the revised uniform law on notarial acts. Many in this committee will remember this bill is exactly as the Senate Judiciary Committee passed this bill last year with just the date changes, and it's what we more formally call just remote online notary.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any objection to the introduction? Seeing none, the bill is introduced. Thank you, Mr. Miller. The next order of business before the committee today is the consideration of the appointment by Governor Kelly of Carl Folsom III as a judge of the Kansas Court of Appeals to serve subject to retention elections as set forth in statute, succeeding the Honorable Steve Lieben. KSA 20-3020 provides that any vacancy on the Court of Appeals is filled by appointment by the governor with the consent of the Senate. The clerk of the Supreme Court is required to give notice to the governor of any vacancy, and the governor accepts applications, the appointment, and submits an appointee to the Senate for confirmation. To be qualified for appointment, the person shall have been regularly admitted to practice law in the state of Kansas and engage in the active and continuous practice of law as a lawyer, judge of a court of record, or any court in this state, full-time teacher of law in an accredited law school, or any combination thereof, for a period of at least 10 years prior to the date of appointment. Since KSA 20-3020 became effective in 2013, the appointment and consent procedure has been used 5 times in the Senate Committee on Judiciary, and the committee has held 5 hearings on appointees. Recognizing the importance of precedent in such historic matters, the committee will conduct the hearing in a similar manner as prior hearings. That means that our order of business today for the confirmation hearing, which on Carl Folsom, is now open, and we will allot in the committee 5 minutes for Mr. Folsom to make any opening statement or remarks, and then 5 minutes for any other conferees to present their testimony. Then 5 minutes will be allotted per committee member for questions, and we will proceed in alphabetical order. We'll then have 5 minutes for follow-up questions by any committee member, and then 3 minutes for a closing statement from Mr. Folsom. So with that, I would invite Mr. Folsom to make any opening statement or remarks he may have prepared for today, and welcome to committee. I'll also ask Mr. Vice Chair if he could operate a 5-minute timer, and then let Mr. Folsom know when there's 1 minute remaining, and please let each committee member know when there's 1 minute remaining regarding questions. Thank you so much.
I'll also start my own timer here so I can keep on track. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Carl Folsom. I know you're all aware that I was here 7 months ago, nominated by the governor after being selected as a finalist by the nominating commission. This panel had Kansans from all over the state, lawyers, non-lawyers. It was bipartisan. I received the highest number of votes in each round of voting. I received a call from the governor on the afternoon of May 27th, and I was here before this committee just a few days later on June the 2nd. Yeah, about 3 business days in between, and I actually celebrated a birthday in there too, so it's fair to say that was not my most fun birthday that I've had. I received 18 votes for confirmation, 17 votes against, but I was not confirmed, and I think it surprised a lot of Kansans and attorneys who knew me or my reputation. I've been asked, why would I go through that all again? First, I am qualified for the position, and now the Senate has more information about me. You'll hear from Senator Jeff King, the former chair of this committee. You've got a letter from Steve McAllister, the U.S. Attorney who was appointed by President Trump. Both of these are experienced appellate attorneys who know my record and support my nomination. You've also now heard from hundreds of attorneys from around the state. Likely you've heard from constituents who know my reputation or know me personally. Heard from the Kansas Bar Association that I'm eminently qualified, from prosecutors around the state who believe that I'm qualified and that the court could use a public defender. You've even heard from Justice Caleb Stegall, who said that you should not discount me just because of the unpopular people that I've represented. I'm back here because I have faith in the state of Kansas, the state where my family has lived for over 5 generations. I have faith that the elected representatives of this state will consider these new facts and make an independent decision that I'm qualified for this position. But the other reason I'm here is because the Court of Appeals could use the diversity of experience and background that I can provide. I've discussed previously my history growing up in childhood poverty, how at times I lived in homes with no running water and was lifted out by a single mother who went to nursing school. I worked my way through college working jobs like putting water lines in as a utility contractor employee, making pizza at Casey's General Store, working as a roofer. I even earned money in law school working as a judge on the KU Court of Parking Appeals. So this is not actually the first appellate position that I've sought. There's also never been a public defender on the Court of Appeals. There are judges who are former prosecutors, former civil attorneys, and 3 out of every 4 cases that the court sees are criminal. So they sit in 3-judge panels. Every panel will have, most likely, someone who worked as a civil attorney, someone who worked as a prosecutor, but they don't have the perspective of someone who's worked as a public defender. After the vote in June, I was contacted by other public defenders around the state who hope to one day serve as a judge. They were heartbroken. One told me that if you can't make it, I won't ever have a chance. Another public defender was told that she could be a judge one day, she just needed to wash the public defender off of her, like it was something dirty. But it's not. It's honorable work, it's guaranteed by the Constitution, and every day I get to help protect the constitutional rights of the meek of our state, and I am proud to do it. But these messages were on my mind when I received a call from the nominating commission asking me if I wanted to keep my name in. They had all my materials. I had to interview again, of course, and there were a different set of applicants, but I drove down to Wichita and I interviewed, and this time the voting was unanimous. In each round of voting, I received every vote of that nominating commission.
1 minute remaining, Mr. Folsom.
Thank you. I was selected by the governor, and I'm back here asking you to consider my qualifications under these new circumstances. Here I am. I'm bouncing back like every public defender would, like every Kansan would. I'm asking you to give me a fresh look, and I'm ready to answer any questions that you may have. And also, there will also be proponent testimony, is my understanding, from Senator King and from a former client of mine, Brandon Flint. And I'm now ready for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Folsom. We'll go ahead and hear from the 2 proponent conferees that you mentioned. First, we have Jeff King, former Senate Vice President. Are you appearing via WebEx?
I am, Madam Chairman.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. King. Welcome to committee. And we've got 5 minutes total, so I don't know how you want to determine that with the other conferee or split it evenly, or what would you like to do?
My hope is to be very short, Madam Chairman.
All right, then. Proceed. Thanks very much. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, Ranking Member, members of committee. It's good to see remotely all of you again. Thank you for allowing me to appear remotely. I'm here for 2 reasons today. One reason is I believe in this process that many of you, along with myself and others, helped create 8 years ago. And I also believe in Carl Folsom. I know about 8 months ago, you had the opportunity to consider Carl with very little information. This process works. You have shown, your predecessors have shown that this process works well, but the process only works well when this committee has full information. You, quite frankly, did not have that about Mr. Folsom last time and voted the best you could with what you have. As someone who has professionally worked with Mr. Folsom for over a decade, who knows his reputation, who knows his skill, I want to make sure this time you have full information. And so this process can work the way it works well and the way hopefully it will work for many, many years to come. I first met Mr. Folsom when I founded the appellate section of the Kansas Bar. He was on the board with me. I asked members of the court, who appears before you that you think would be best to serve on this body that best embodies the true characteristics of an appellate advocate in this state? To a person, they all recommended Carl, and I quickly realized why. Carl is a skilled advocate, a brilliant legal mind, and most importantly, someone with integrity. Whenever we had something to do, Carl would always be the first to step up. When I would talk to people he had litigated against, it was always with admiration and respect for his integrity and for his legal acumen were the first responses that I received. In a decade of knowing Carl professionally, I can tell you I've heard nothing but praise from other public defenders, other prosecutors, everyone that has come into contact with him. I believe it's important that our Court of Appeals reflect the diversity in Kansas. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, civil attorneys, small practitioner, large practitioners from all across the state is the way that fair justice represented on appellate courts is best shown. Carl is the best of a very, very important part of my profession, that of the public defender. And I hope today, and I hope in the full Senate, you'll get the opportunity to put a fine example of my profession and of the public defenders in the state on the Court of Appeals. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. King. Next, we then have Brandon Flint, who I also believe is appearing by WebEx. So we've got about 2.5 minutes left for Mr. Flint. Welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Brandon Flint. I was facing years in prison for protecting my wife, protecting the very same way I was taught as a soldier. My brain didn't allow me to see what I'd done was wrong, and I was convicted of aggravated assault. Carl didn't simply file court motions and paperwork. He took my case to the Kansas Legislature and literally changed the laws. He'd give me a statement to the Kansas legislators, which was resulted in the amendment of KSA 2132 3211, allowing the court instructions for defense of another to be allowable. This changed my life. The law was changed, my appeal was granted, and the next trial I was found not guilty. Had Carl not seen the potential in me, my case, an opportunity to amend the law, I wouldn't be where I am today. Because of Carl, I'm not behind bars. My children and wife have their father and husband, and my name has been cleared. I was able to obtain employment again with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where I currently work with Crane Nuclear as a field service tech. We're working on nuclear power plants here in the U.S. and overseas. Without the work that he does, that wouldn't be possible.
Thank you, Mr. Flint. Is there anything further, Mr. Flint?
That's really it. I mean, Carl went above and beyond what he was supposed to do. I've had appellate defenders before, and none of them did what Carl did for me. I was expecting just to have the bare bones minimum thrown under the bus type of representation, and that's not what Carl did for me. He really went to bat for me with everything that he had, and I really appreciate him for it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flint, for appearing in committee today and providing your testimony. With that, I would direct the committee's attention to your packet, your confirmation packet. On the hearing, this packet has been available since the first day of session on January 11th for any committee member to review. Is there a question, Senator Corson?
Are we able to ask questions of proponents? Is that going to be later?
Yes, I'm going
Okay.
to review for the committee what's in the packet, and then we will have 5 minutes per committee member for Mr. Folsom to ask questions of.
And ask questions of proponents?
Sure. We'll have, you can use your 5 minutes as you see fit.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So committee, in your packet, there's a review of appointments by legislative research, submission memo from the governor, Senate confirmation information summary, Mr. Folsom's resume, the governor's appointment questionnaire, Kansas Government Ethics Commission statement of substantial interests form, a news article regarding 4 district attorneys regarding Kansas Senate's rejection of court nominee was just plain wrong, an article by Mark Bennett, Charles Branson, Mark Dupree, and Susan Reichmeyer, a news article by ks.gov in defense of the unpopular, and selected significant cases. There's also in your packet written proponent testimony submitted by Brandon Bell, Melody Brannon, Kansas Federal Public Defender, Heather Cessna, Kansas State Board of Indigence Defense Service, Alice Craig, KU Paul E. Wilson Project for Innocence and Post-Conviction Remedies, Mark Dupree, Sr., Wyandotte County District Attorney, Robert Fairchild, Scott Allegrucci, Office of the Governor, Adam Hall of Thompson Hall, Gregory Ho, Assistant U.S. Attorney, District of Kansas, Christopher Joseph of Joseph Hollander and Kraft, Rick Kittle, Kansas Appellate Defender Office, Sean Minahan, Assistant District Attorney, Johnson County District Attorney's Office, Jessica Sewer, Attorney, message of March 6, 2020, signed by 37 individuals, Stephen McAllister, U.S. Attorney, and Dustin Slinkard, First Assistant U.S. Attorney. So again, that information is available in your packet. And with that, then we will turn to any questions by committee members who have any, and we'll start alphabetically. We'll start with Senator Baumgartner. Senator, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Folsom, is it your contention that you did not have a fair hearing 233 days ago when you were before the Senate Judiciary Committee?
It was a fair hearing under the circumstances. It was just because of the really uniqueness of the special session and the statutory requirement of when the appointment had to be made. It was a rushed process, and so I think it can be more. I think it has been more thorough this time. There's more time for conferees and folks to submit their recommendations. There's more time for me to meet with individual senators, and but I would say that under the circumstances.
So again, was it a fair hearing?
It was a fair hearing. It was a rushed process, though.
I would like to move on to my next question. You were recommended by the governor, I believe it was 83 days after the Senate took a vote. So how has your CV or your resume and your application changed from that time, during that time period?
It's pretty similar.
Is the only difference you have additional letters and some newspaper articles? Is that the addition, or is there something specific with regard to your resume and your application that is different?
My application is more thorough because it's had time or there's been time for more conferees and more recommendations. So that would be the change. That largely I'm the same attorney I was 7 months ago. It's just that now there's more time for input from the folks who know me and my reputation.
At your last hearing, you spoke quite a bit about your respect for the legislature and the legislative process. In fact, that you brought that up nearly a dozen times. So explain to us if you have that respect for the legislative process and respect for the legislature and their process, how does that reflect with a vote of the Senate that you're back again before us?
As I said in my opening statement, I have faith in the state of Kansas. I have faith in the legislature, having worked here for 2 years in undergrad. I know that sometimes bills or issues are not fully developed, and they can get looked at again. And that's where I feel like I am in the process, that 3 business days when the legislature's not even in session, it was not a really good opportunity to hear from everyone who knew me and knew my reputation. And so it's because of the respect that I have for the legislature that I applied again, knowing that you all would give me a fresh look if there was more and more thorough information.
So if I might, Madam Chair, this will be my last question. So you feel that not your resume and not your application, but what others have to say is more important than you appearing before the committee and our review of your application and your resume?
I think it's a totality of the circumstances. You hear from people who know me. You get to more time to review my work. There's now select cases that you can review. You've heard from Mr. Flint, Mr. King, Senator King. So I think it's a totality of the circumstances, and now you have more information.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Baumgartner. Next, we have Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Carl. I just have a few questions for you. How long have you been a public defender?
I've been a public defender off and on. I started my career as an appellate public defender, so about 4.5 years doing that. And then I was in private practice for 3 years. And then I went to the federal public defender's office, first in Muskogee, Oklahoma. And I was there doing appellate work and trial work for a couple of years, and then I came back to Topeka office. So I've been in the federal public defender system for about 8 years now.
Let me interrupt for just a moment without interrupting your 5 minutes, Senator, but we've been requested by the revisor's office. Make sure, Mr. Folsom, you speak closely enough into the microphone and clearly so that those listening online can be sure to hear you as well. And just remind the committee members to make sure you speak clearly into your microphone so you can be heard online. Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry, Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 15 years plus, you would add up?
Attorney for more than 15 years, and I did 3 years in private practice, kind of in the middle of that.
Okay. A few other things. I'm glad you brought out the diversity with your background. That's something we hadn't heard last time, so it's interesting to know how the makeup would be and how your colleagues would look to you as with your background and experience and in the past. One thing you didn't mention, which I was intrigued with last time, you were a legislative intern when you were here. Can you remind us who you served under?
I worked for Representative Jerry Ray, who was from Johnson County, and then my second year was with Representative Carl Holmes from Liberal. So a lot of fun, actually. I really enjoyed my time here.
Thank you, Carl, and Madam Chair, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bowers. Next, we have Senator Corson with any questions.
Thank you. I had a question for Senator King. Senator King, questions have been raised about whether Mr. Folsom would be an activist judge. In your opinion, do you believe that Mr. Folsom would be an activist judge?
No, I don't believe he would. If I thought Mr. Folsom would be an activist judge, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't write a letter of support. I think one of the most important functions of a confirmation process is to make sure that prospective judges adhere to a philosophy of judicial restraint and understand that this austere body, along with the House and the governor, make laws and the court just interprets them. And in my professional knowledge of Mr. Folsom, I have seen nothing that would indicate anything but a strict adherence to legal interpretation and judicial restraint.
Thank you, Senator King. You know, I want to note that that opinion is also consistent with the opinion of another one of our state's strongest legal minds and a leading judicial conservative, Stephen McAllister, who has served our state with distinction as the Dean of the Law School at the University of Kansas, as Kansas's Solicitor General under Attorney General Derek Schmidt, and is currently the United States Attorney for Kansas, where he's our state's chief federal prosecutor. That in that letter to the committee, he wrote that having known you since you were an undergraduate at KU, through being opposing counsel in a case with you as U.S. Attorney, that you will, quote, will approach judging with humility and modesty, that you, quote, will not be driven by an agenda, end quote, nor will you, quote, be political as a judge. Instead, Mr. McAllister, again, probably our state's leading judicial conservative, said that you will, quote, simply be an excellent, careful, and thoughtful judge. Mr. McAllister wrote that he, quote, has complete faith in your abilities, integrity, and fairness. And he concludes his letter to us by stating his, quote, enthusiastic and unqualified personal support for your nomination, end quote. But I want to put the question to you, Mr. Folsom, so you can answer it directly. What do you believe is the proper role of a judge, and how would you go about deciding cases?
The proper role of a judge is quite simply to apply the law to the facts of a case. And in every case, there's either a statutory issue or a constitutional issue, and it's not the job of a judge to try to change the law or to get into their own personal policy perspectives. The role of a judge is to research what the law is and to apply the text that's written by the legislature or the text that's in the Constitution, and then apply that to the facts of a case. So really, it's about respect for the separation of powers, and respect for what the legislature has said a statute is, or what is actually written in the Constitution, and really staying in the lane of the judge, applying the law to the facts of a case with integrity and modesty and humility, and not getting into what you think the right outcome should be. It's what the law says the right outcome should be.
I also want to ask about the experience that you would bring with you to the bench. How many appeals have you litigated?
I've been lead counsel in over 200 appeals.
How many times have you argued before the Kansas Supreme Court?
21 times.
How many times have you argued before the Kansas Court of Appeals?
46 times.
How many times have you argued before the Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit?
I've argued there 11 times.
Based on your understanding, how does your appellate experience compare to the experience of the current Court of Appeals judges when they join the bench?
My understanding and talking to them and folks who know the history is that I have argued and handled significantly more appeals than any other judge before they were appointed to the bench.
And that's important because, again, as it's been mentioned,
1 minute remaining, Senator.
that between 75 to 80% of the cases heard by the Court of Appeals in a given year are criminal cases. Currently, fewer than half of our Court of Appeals judges had any criminal law experience at all before joining the bench. Those that did have some limited criminal experience, it was exclusively prosecutorial experience. So I believe that your experience is filling a significant gap on the court. I want to point out that we heard from Ms. Klein on Tuesday, who I believe is a strong nominee and I'm proud to support. Ms. Klein's resume says that she's authored, quote, several appellate briefs, and she does roughly one appellate argument a year. Ms. Klein has very little criminal law experience to be going on a court that hears 75% of criminal cases. So while I am proud to support Ms. Klein and believe that she is going to be a fantastic judge on the Court of Appeals, I also want to point out that Mr. Folsom's experience with respect to the court that he is being nominated to would be significant.
Thank you. Next, we have Senator Gossage, if you have any questions.
Yes, Madam Chair, just a couple. Thank you for being here. I read through the packet that was left at my desk, and I appreciate that background. Just a couple of quick things. First of all, I do appreciate your public defender status, having served on the board, the Kansas State Board of Indigent Defense Services myself, and so I appreciate that very much. However, you did mention that there has been no judge that has been confirmed as a public defender. Why do you suppose that is?
I think some public defenders are scared from applying. I know that there have been strong candidates that have applied and other folks were selected. I really don't know why there hasn't been a public defender get this far, but I'm proud to be the first. I'm proud to represent our profession because it is a proud profession. It is one that's anchored in the Constitution. I want to thank you for your service on the Board of Indigent Defense Services. I know managing that agency is also extremely important. But I really don't know why other qualified candidates haven't made it this far, but I'm glad to be the first, and I'm hopeful that I'll be the first one appointed.
Could it be that the reason that that an individual is just strictly a public defender has not been appointed is for lack of diversity?
I suppose that could be the case. And to that extent, I'm glad that I spent 3 years in private practice doing civil cases as well. I've tried civil cases in state and federal court and done civil appeals in state and federal court. I've handled things like limited family law, some other domestic relations cases, juvenile, administrative law. I've done some immigration work, so I'm proud that I have more than just the public defender background. That could have been why they didn't make it this far, but I'm proud to say that I do have experience in civil cases as well, and that maybe that is why that I've made it this far.
Thank you. And one last question, Madam Chair. You referenced Judge Caleb Stegall, or Stegall. Did he endorse you?
No, he did not endorse me. The canons of judicial ethics would prohibit him from endorsing me as a candidate. He simply stood up for folks like me who have defended the unpopular because he was in a similar situation back in 2013.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gossage. Next, we have Senator Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Folsom, for being here again. And several of the concerns that I have are being addressed most recently now by Senator Gossage. The question being, if you could opine, and you have, as to how someone with such a rich array and such a distinct history as yours, being in public defense, has not made it to this particular position before. I do appreciate your response, and I would like to underscore that I, for one, as I think the longest member of this panel, am appreciative of seeing your reapplication, of seeing you be here and to go through this process, because no one here or in this Senate has had the pleasure or the ability, as often as I, to review nominees for the court. And you are by far, as I think former Senator King, the former chair of this committee, for who I was also the ranking member at the time, has mentioned, you're probably by and away, sir, the most qualified applicant for a position that I've seen in 20 years. That having been said, speaking to the diversity of it, although there has not been an endorsement from the High Court, I would like to share again with the committee, and specifically to quote from a statement that's all in our packets, but to ask that each of us in this consideration of this nominee listen to what members of the process, the practice of law have to say about Mr. Folsom. First, I should mention that our district's attorneys, the ones who are responsible for bringing accused criminals before the bar, have provided in our package, specifically District Attorney Mark Bennett out of Sedgwick, my own district attorney out of Wyandotte County, Mark Dupree Sr., Charles Branson out of Douglas County, and Susan Reichmer out of Finney, who speak, again, on the flip side of a public defender. They're the prosecutors that bring the cases, in saying that Mr. Folsom, by and away, should be considered for this post. Again, the opposite side, if you will, of the law, who recognize his acumen and ability. And in closing, at this point, Madam Chair, again, when Senator King was the chair, Chair Warren, and I was the ranking, he and I were not always on the same page. Let's just put it like that. And we would look at different applicants for these positions and oftentimes would not agree on nominations that would be sent to the full floor. I am pleased that he and I are on the same page. It is obvious, Mr. Folsom, to most people that you should be there. And again, in closing, the quote from an article that now Justice Stegall said, where he quotes Mike Hoflick at University of Law. He says, quote, "One of the most fundamental underpinnings of the American justice system is that every litigant is entitled to legal representation. Lawyers often take on unpopular clients. It is simply wrong to suggest that a lawyer is unfit to be a judge because one does not like his clients." Close quote. I would hope, Mr. Folsom, that this panel would overcome any prejudicial
1 minute remaining,
your
Senator.
clients, thank you, ma'am, any prejudicial animus that they would hold for the stellar job that you do across the board by all areas of the bar and every stakeholder, pro and con, and that we would affirm what is probably the best qualified candidate that has come before this Senate, at least in 20 years. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Haley. Alphabetically, we would have next Senator Pyle. He's, I believe, appearing via WebEx. However, Senate rules state that for a committee member to participate in the committee meeting, the committee member must be physically present in the hearing room, the meeting room. So the next alphabetically senator is Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Folsom, for being here again today. And of course, I was here in the previous hearing. I do want to say that if you felt at that time that we were trying to devalue your experience as a defender, I certainly had no intention of doing so, because I do think you provide a valuable service defending those who others would not. And so again, I think that a lot of the questions I had have been answered, particularly by Senator Baumgartner. We've heard from people who've worked with you. We've heard from people you've defended. Currently, you're a lecturer at KU, is that correct?
That's right. It's a trial advocacy position where it's more of a lab, really, where you're working directly with students in a small group, going over civil cases, criminal cases, and doing the trial, teaching those trial advocacy skills in those two cases.
Who we haven't heard from were some of the students. After the last hearing that we had for you, I did hear from a couple of students who thanked me actually, because they did feel that you would have some difficulty with being an activist on the bench, and I just wonder how you would respond to that.
I guess I would have to hear the individual complaint, but when I'm teaching in a lab role as an instructor at KU, I'm teaching them to be advocates. And so I kind of had my advocate hat on, like, here's how you do it. And the role of a judge is completely different. I'm not going to be an advocate for one side or the other. I'm going to be an advocate for the law, and I'm going to apply it as written by the legislature, and I'm going to apply it as it's written in the Constitution. So when I teach those labs, I get amped up, and I'm trying to teach them to be advocates. I want them to be trial attorneys like I am. But the role of a judge is completely different. I will consider each case based on the law that's written and apply it to the facts of a case without passion or prejudice.
Would you have felt more comfortable coming before us had you given yourself a little more time to gain experience on a more broad scale?
I believe believe it or not, I'm probably going to be uncomfortable one way or the other. But I believe that I do have the level of experience and the depth and breadth of experience that the court really needs. 75% of the cases that go before the Court of Appeals are criminal, and that's, you know, about 75 or 80% of my career has been devoted to public defense, where that perspective and that professional experience is lacking from the court. But I do have civil case experience. As I said before with Senator Gossage, I've tried civil cases in state and federal court. I've done civil appeals in state and federal court. I've handled things like family law, immigration, administrative law. And so I'm not going to be an expert on every issue that comes before the court. I think I'll be an expert on most of the cases because most of the cases are criminal law. They involve statutory issues or constitutional issues that are extremely familiar to me. But for the other 25%, the other 20% of cases, there's probably going to be someone else on that 3-judge panel. And that's the great thing about coming together, you know, folks with different backgrounds and different experiences coming together and working together to receive, to reach a just result, is that I'm going to be strong in criminal law, but hopefully Judge Klein will be strong in civil law, or Judge Warner, who's a friend of mine, who this committee confirmed or passed favorably on. There are judges that have strengths and backgrounds that will be useful, and I'm just going to bring a diversity of experience and a diversity of background to the court.
1 minute remaining, Senator.
Actually, that's all the questions I have. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Folsom.
Thank you, Senator Thompson. Next, we have Senator Wilborn.
Good morning, and welcome again to the committee. You obviously have been probed pretty good here with a number of questions, and I won't reiterate those. And I apologize, but I didn't bring the transcript from last year or last hearing, but there was a question posed to you that went something like this. If you had a choice to side with the Supreme Court or the Constitution, I believe your answer was, I would side with the Supreme Court. Would you care to elaborate a little more, particularly for this body?
Yes, thank you, Senator Wilborn. That was presented to me in an email the day of my hearing, and I responded very quickly, you know, to get some response to that senator who asked me that question. The question is an interesting one, and if you watch the nomination hearings of Amy Coney Barrett with the U.S. Supreme Court recently, she explained the role of an intermediate court judge, and she said, I can't buck the Supreme Court. So there are issues where, and the way the judicial system is set up in the Kansas Constitution, which I've got a copy of here, Article 3 of the Kansas Constitution says that there's a Supreme Court. And the Court of Appeals is actually a creature of statute, but part of that system is that the Supreme Court makes decisions and the lower courts follow them. And the answer I gave, it could have been more developed, it could have been explained a little bit better, but the gist of the answer is that, you know, the Constitution of the state of Kansas and the Constitution of the United States is, you know, those are the supreme law of the state. And if a decision of the Kansas Supreme Court is contrary to the Constitution, it should be overruled. But that's not my role as a judge. My role is not as an advocate. My role will be, you know, if I'm a lawyer, I'm taking that to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I've done that. But as a judge, I follow the law as it's written by the legislature or as it's set out in the Constitution. And if the Supreme Court has decided an issue, as Justice Amy Coney Barrett said, it's not my job to buck the Supreme Court. You know, that's an advocate's job if they want to get that overturned. And so that's my answer. I could have been a lot more detailed last time, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain that a little more thoroughly.
Very good. And Madam Chairman, that concludes my questions.
Thank you, Senator Wilborn. I have just a few questions and a comment. Congratulations on making it again through the process this far and appearing before committee again. We heard from the nominee on Tuesday, Ms. Amy Klein, speak of the big factor that she thought made her qualified to be considered for a Court of Appeals judge is the breadth and depth of her experience I see from your resume, you've been a lawyer for 15 years, is that right?
A little bit more than 15, but that's about right.
Okay, and I think you said you had 3 years of civil practice?
It was criminal and civil. So I did both in that private practice when I was not in a government position.
And so has it been more than 8 years then since you've done any civil litigation work?
Actually, it's not. In the public defender office, we will occasionally handle civil cases that are habeas corpus. And so I tried a civil case, I want to say it was December of 2018 maybe, or 2019, involving a mandatory minimum sentence, but it was attacked via civil procedure. And so I've done civil work, I've done civil appeals when I was in the federal public defender in Muskogee, Oklahoma. And it involves a criminal case, but it's a civil attack on the criminal conviction.
Still sort of in the criminal realm then, would you say?
It's criminal subject matter, but it involved the civil rules of procedure.
Something that's discussed often today is hate speech and censorship by private corporations. So I'm wondering what you see the relationship between hate speech and censorship and the First Amendment.
Well, the First Amendment is, it's the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights, and so it's part of that U.S. Constitution that is the highest law of the land. And as a judicial candidate, I can't get into specific issues that might come before the court. The judicial canons of ethics prohibit me from answering specific questions. But I can tell you that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land on federal issues. And if I get that question before me as a judge, what I will do is faithfully apply the Constitution as it's written and as it's been litigated by the side, the two sides of a case. But I can't get into how I might handle a case or that sort of thing if an issue might come before me as a judge.
I understand those restrictions. Thank you for pointing that out. But I don't think my question is really directed to a specific case. It's kind of your overall philosophy, whether hate speech is protected by the First Amendment.
The U.S. Supreme Court says that it is.
And do you have thoughts on what some are seeing as censorship by private companies and any relation to the First Amendment there, or there's no relationship?
Well, the First Amendment has there is a government requirement there, and so the government cannot suppress speech. So that's how the text of the Constitution is worded, and that's how I would apply it, is going to the plain language of the text of the First Amendment, and it prohibits the Congress from imposing restrictions and not necessarily private businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Folsom. And next, then, we have 5 minutes for any follow-up questions from any committee members. I see one hand, Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Folsom, I just want to get a chance to talk about, because we've talked about your criminal defense experience. We have a letter as part of our packet that I want to point out from Mr. Dustin Slinkard, who is the first Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of Kansas. He is the former head of the Criminal Division for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Kansas. He wrote to this committee that you are, quote, serious and fair-minded, that you have, quote, the professional demeanor, diligent work ethic, and command of the law to be an exceptional judge, and that he, quote, recommends you for our consideration without qualification, end quote. He concludes his letter to us by writing that, quote, the public would be well served to have the benefits of your talents on the bench. And that's from a prosecutor who's had cases on the other side of you. But I want to be able to hear it from you, how you feel about it. Do you feel at all, based on your experience, that you would bring with you to the bench a bias towards criminal defendants?
Absolutely not. My role as a public defender, or when I did civil cases, my role is an advocate. And that's what I teach my students at KU to do, is to be an advocate. And the role of a judge is completely different. The role of a judge applies the law as written to the facts of a case. They don't have personal preference as to who should win. They apply the law to the facts of a case faithfully, and they don't get into what who the litigants are or who the parties are before them. So that I don't believe that I would have a prejudice on that type of issue. If a case came before me, it wouldn't matter if it was a criminal defendant or a big business. I'm going to apply the law as it's written by the legislature or as it's written in the Constitution.
Would you have any trouble affirming a criminal conviction where the record below showed that the defendant received adequate process and that the law was correctly applied?
Absolutely not. That's actually what I do now, is I help ensure that the process works fairly. That's what the Sixth Amendment, that's why there's a Sixth Amendment right to defense counsel, and a Section 10 of the Kansas Constitution Bill of Rights provides for counsel so the process can go forward. Without public defenders, the process wouldn't work, and without appellate judges reviewing the work of the lower courts, that process wouldn't work. So that's what I promise to do, and I think I'll be able to do it fairly, and so do the new conferees who have provided proponent testimony in front of you all.
Thank you for that, Mr. Folsom. I just want to conclude by pointing out that it seems a little bit incongruous to me when considering a nominee for an appellate court that this committee on Tuesday seemed to have no reservations about Ms. Klein, who again I support, but who has little experience with criminal law, even though 75% of the cases—
Is there a question for Mr. Folsom? Is that a question for Mr. Folsom, Senator?
No, but I would like to use my time just to make a statement.
It's 5 minutes total, so if you don't have a question, I'll see if there are any other questions from other senators. I didn't mean 5 minutes per senator again. We don't have time for that. 5 minutes total. So do you have a question there for the nominee?
No further questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, then we will have 3 minutes for closing remarks from Mr. Folsom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Carl Folsom. I want to start by thanking Chair and the committee for your time and hard work reviewing my materials. I want to thank my wife, Karen, who's back here, my family who are watching at home. I want to thank my friends and the attorneys around the state who really rallied behind me the last 7 months. They gave me another chance to be here, and I'm deeply appreciative of that. If the Senate confirms my appointment, I promise to do my best to live up to the positive words that you've heard about me. I promise to take the job seriously, to do it with humility and modesty. I promise to do the hard work, showing my legal analysis and my opinions so the parties that come before me or before the court will know that they've been heard and treated fairly in the process. I also promise to be respectful of the other branches of government. It's not the role of a judge to change the law that's in the statute or that's written in the Constitution. The power rests solely with the people of Kansas through their elected representatives. And I will bring real value to the court. The majority of cases heard by the court are criminal cases. And although I've handled civil cases at trial level and on appeal, and in both state and federal court, my expertise is in criminal law and the constitutional and statutory issues that dominate the docket of the Court of Appeals. The court could use someone with this expertise. Again, there are former civil litigators, there are former prosecutors, former district judges, but there has never been a former public defender appointed to the Court of Appeals. As you all know, there is something powerful about people from different backgrounds and with different expertise coming together to do the right thing for Kansas. That's what I can help provide. My personal background and my professional diversity—
1 minute remaining, Mr. Folsom.
—will bring a unique perspective and strengthen the 14-member Court of Appeals. We will all serve the law, and we will all serve Kansas, but we will do so with different strengths and different perspectives. Again, I have faith in Kansas. I have faith that the elected representatives of my home state will review my qualifications without their minds made up beforehand. And if I'm confirmed to the Kansas Court of Appeals, I promise to do the same thing for every case that comes before me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Folsom. Thank you for appearing in committee today. And with that, then, we will close the hearing part of the confirmation hearing on Carl Folsom, and we will move then to final action on confirmation hearings. Before we get into debate and discussion on the confirmations, I would ask Mr. Revisor to please remind the committee members of the three possible motions that could come out of our committee today. Mr. Revisor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Jason Thompson with the Revisor's Office. The three possible motions are that the committee recommend the appointment favorably for confirmation by the Senate, that the committee recommend the appointment be not confirmed by the Senate, or that the committee report the appointment to the Senate without recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. So with that, committee, we will move to final action on the confirmation hearing. First, on Amy Klein. Is there any discussion or motion regarding the confirmation hearing on Amy Klein? Senator Wilborn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that Amy Klein be recommended favorably for the confirmation to the Kansas Court of Appeals, replacing the Honorable G. Joseph Perrin. Thank you.
Committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Senator Haley, do you have a second?
Madam Chair, I do. I second the nomination that was placed by Senator Wilburn for Amy Klein.
Thank you, Senator Haling. So, committee, we do have a second. Is there debate or discussion regarding the motion? Seeing none, then the motion before the committee is a motion that the committee recommend the appointment of Amy Klein to the Kansas Court of Appeals favorably for confirmation by the Senate. All in favor signify by stating aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. Hearing none, the motion passes. We'll then move to final action on the confirmation hearing of Carl Folsom. The committee has heard the three possible motions. One, that the committee recommend the appointment favorably for confirmation by the Senate, or the committee recommend the appointment be not confirmed by the Senate, or the committee report the appointment to the Senate without recommendation. As we open debate on final action, do I have a motion? Yes, Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the Senate Judiciary Committee pass out Carl Folsom without recommendation.
Thank you, Senator. Do I have a second? Senator Thompson?
I second the motion.
Thank you. Committee, there's a motion and a second. We'll then have a debate on the motion. Seeing none, then the motion before the committee is that the committee report the appointment of Carl Folsom to the Kansas Court of Appeals to the Senate without recommendation. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. The motion passes. Having then concluded final action on the confirmation hearing of Amy Klein and Carl Folsom, that does conclude our business for the day, and the